I want to tell you about the morning I couldn't give one orange to a man who was thirsty. That is where this story begins. Not with the debt, not with the envelope, not with what happened after. It begins with a Tuesday morning in October and a single orange and a woman, me, who had so many oranges. She stacked them in pyramids and still couldn't give one away. My name is Nadia Karimi. I am 61 years old. I have been selling produce at the Eastern Market in Dearborn, Michigan for 29 years. Tomatoes from the farms south of Toledo, strawberries from West Michigan in the spring, apples in the fall, citrus from Florida and California all winter. I know every vendor on my row and most of the vendors on the rows behind and beside me. I know which produce buyer pays on time and which ones make you wait. I know which wholesale truckers cut corners and which ones don't. I have been in that market since before some of the other vendors were born, and most mornings I still get there first. I am telling you this so you understand what kind of person I was. Not a lazy person, not a careless person, not a person who didn't work, a person who had closed. I want to tell you where I came from before I tell you what happened, because the story of how I got to Dearborn is part of what the story is about. I was born in Kabul in 1963. My father was a civil engineer. My mother taught mathematics at a girls' school. We were the kind of family that believed in education the way some families believe in religion, absolutely, unquestioningly, as the thing that stands between you and whatever the world might do to you. I went to university, I was going to be a doctor, then the Soviet invasion came and the war came, and then more war. And my family did what families do when everything collapses. We left, in pieces, over years. My oldest brother went first to Germany. My parents followed when they could. I came last in 1991 through Pakistan and then, because I had a cousin in Michigan, to Dearborn. Dearborn in 1991 was not what it is now. The Arab American community was large. It had been building since the 1960s, since the auto industry brought immigrants from Yemen and Lebanon and Syria, who brought their families, who brought their communities. But the Afghan community was newer and smaller, and I arrived speaking Dari and some English and no Arabic and knowing almost no one. I found my footing through work, the way immigrants usually do. I found a job at a grocery warehouse. I found a room to rent from an Afghan family in the south end of Dearborn. I found a community slowly, the way you find a community in a new place, one person at a time, one trust at a time. And I found Yusuf. He was from Herat. He had been in Dearborn for 4 years by the time I arrived, already part of the small Afghan community that was beginning to establish itself in the city. He worked at a produce distribution company on Michigan Avenue, up before dawn every morning, moving inventory, learning which farms produced what, building relationships with the growers who supplied the markets. He was saving money with the specific discipline of a man who has decided exactly what he is saving for and is not going to be distracted from it. He was patient in a way I found unfamiliar. I was impatient. I am still impatient. It is my basic character. And Yusuf was the kind of man who would wait for the right thing without agitation. He waited for a produce booth at the Eastern Market for 3 years, watching the market, learning it, saving until he had enough. He did not try to rush it. I liked this about him immediately. We argued sometimes about pace. I wanted to move faster, he wanted to do it right, but the arguing was good arguing, the kind that gets to the right answer faster than either of you would have gotten there alone. We were married in 1993. By 1995, we had our first stall. and for 12 years we were, together, a complete thing. I did not know how completely I had depended on his particular qualities, his patience, his warmth with people, his gift for making everyone feel seen, until those qualities were gone and I had only mine, my efficiency, my impatience, my ability to solve the immediate problem and close the door on everything else. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what the market meant before I tell you what it looked like from inside that Tuesday in October. It was not just a business. It was the thing we had built in a country that was not the country we were born in, with our own hands, from work that started before dawn and ended after dark, the accumulation of hundreds of decisions and thousands of days. It was proof that we had arrived, that we had made something, that Dearborn was our place now, not just a place we were staying, and the other vendors were our community. I need you to understand that too, because part of what happened to me over the 18 years after Yusuf died was that I closed myself off from that community, even while I was physically inside it every day. The Eastern Market in Dearborn is a community. It has been for decades. The vendors know each other's families. They watch each other's stalls when someone needs a bathroom break. They share information about suppliers and warn each other about produce that's going bad. They notice when someone is struggling. They show up when someone needs help. I had stopped participating in that community, not loudly, not dramatically. I had just gone quiet. I came in, I set up, I worked my stall, I went home. I stopped going to the vendor association meetings. I stopped attending the occasional dinners someone would organize. I answered questions about produce and prices and nothing else. I need you to see this clearly before the story continues. Not a lazy person, not a careless person. A person who had been closed for years and called it strength. Leave a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. I want to see how far this reaches. My husband, Yusuf, died 18 years ago. He was 49. A brain bleed without warning a Thursday morning. He was at the market. He was carrying a crate of peaches from the truck to the stall, the same thing he had done hundreds of Thursday mornings, and he sat down on the loading dock and didn't get back up. I want to tell you who Yusuf was, because this story does not make sense without him. He was a man who talked to everyone. That is the simplest way to say it. Every customer who came to our stall, Yusuf knew their name and something specific about them. Their kids' names, their neighborhood, what they were cooking that weekend. He remembered things. He had the kind of memory for people that made people feel remembered, which is rarer than it sounds. I used to stand next to him at the market and watch him with customers and think, he is genuinely happy to see them, all of them. I was not like that even then. I was the one who knew the prices and the suppliers and which produce was worth buying this week and which was not. I was good at the work. Yusuf was good at the people. Together, we were a complete thing. After he died, I was half of something that needed to be whole to work, and I did not know how to be the half I wasn't. I kept the stall going anyway. What else was I going to do? It was everything we had built. Our 3 children had grown up coming to that market on Saturday mornings, sitting in the truck bed while we unloaded, eating the bruised fruit we couldn't sell. My son Ahmad once ate 11 plums in one morning and spent the afternoon in significant discomfort, and Yusuf and I laughed about that for years. The market was Yusuf's smell and Yusuf's laugh and the way he stacked tomatoes in a spiral pattern that customers would stop and look at before they bought. I have tried to do the spiral pattern for 18 years and I have never gotten it right. So I kept going. 6 days a week, 4 in the morning to start loading at the market by 6, done by 3 or 4, home and asleep by 9 to do it again tomorrow. And what I did not understand was that without Yusuf to be the human half of us, I was slowly becoming only the work half, less a person and more a function, efficient, capable, closed. And somewhere in those 18 years, I borrowed money I shouldn't have borrowed, not all at once. The first time was a refrigeration emergency, August, a load of stone fruit on the truck, everything going to spoil in the Michigan heat. I needed $2,000 by the next morning, and the bank was going to take 3 business days minimum. A man in the market named Frank Connolly had been doing informal commercial lending in that district for years. Everyone knew about Frank. Not everyone had used him, but everyone knew the basic terms. He moved fast. He wanted his percentage monthly. He expected to be paid when he said to be paid. I used him. I paid that one back in 6 weeks and told myself it was a one-time thing. Then the following spring, a supplier dispute held up a shipment, and I lost 2 weeks of inventory and used Frank again. Then a winter that was slow and I was short on the equipment lease. Each time I told myself this was the last time, and each time something else went wrong. Frank was always there and Frank always moved fast, and the relief of having the immediate problem solved was enough to keep me from looking too hard at the terms or the total. Over 7 years, the small emergencies had compounded into something I had stopped looking at directly. I kept a spiral notebook with the figures. I knew the number was in there. I just stopped turning to that page. 3 days before Frank's Friday deadline, I turned to the page. $87,000. The terms between Frank and me were informal, not on official paperwork, not in a formal loan agreement. I had been foolish enough to let that go on for years without fixing it, and by the time I understood the implications of that, it was too late to fix without Frank's cooperation, and Frank was not going to cooperate at this particular moment. What Frank had told me the previous Friday, in his office on Schaefer Road, in the specific polite voice of a man who has had this conversation before and knows how it goes, was that he needed the balance cleared by end of business Friday, or we would need to discuss other arrangements. I had been in produce markets for 3 decades. I knew what other arrangements meant for a stall and its inventory and its years of customer relationships. I had 3 days. I want you to hold that number. Not 3 weeks, not 3 months. 3 days to find $87,000 that I did not have and could not borrow on any timeline that would have mattered. 3 days. I am telling you this so that when the envelope arrives, you understand what it arrived into. I want to tell you who I was by that Tuesday morning, because I think this matters. I prayed 5 times a day. I had done this my whole adult life. I said the words, I did the ablutions, I faced Mecca. I was a Muslim woman who prayed 5 times a day and had not, in 18 years, felt anything on the other side of those prayers. I want to be honest about this because it matters for what comes later. I was not a hypocrite in my practice. I meant the prayers in the sense that I did not say them insincerely. I believed in God in the way that the 18 years of surviving after Yusuf actually required me to believe in something. The world was too hard to be purely accidental, too specific in its difficulties to be random. I believed, I prayed, but I prayed the way you keep a habit you no longer examine, the way you do something so many times that the motion becomes automatic and the interior of the motion empties out. I said the words. I did not wait for anything on the other side. I assumed, without ever consciously deciding to assume it, that the transaction went one direction. I performed the prayer was logged, and that was sufficient. I had been treating God as a record keeper for 18 years, not a person, not someone who might have something to say back. I had not cried since Yusuf's funeral, not once. I had told myself this was strength. I was not kind to people. I am saying this plainly because I was not a kind woman in that period of my life. Let me tell you who was in that market, because the contrast matters. Betty Osei was 2 stalls down on my right. She was from Ghana in her mid-50s, round and warm and endlessly cheerful in a way that I had once found irritating and had come to understand was genuine. She made chin-chin and meat pies and small pastries, and she kept a plate of samples at the front of her table at all times. She knew every regular customer by name and by what they usually bought and by something personal. The grandmother in the hospital, the son who just started college, the dog who had just had surgery. She remembered these things and she asked follow-up questions. People came to Betty's stall not just for the pastries, but because Betty made them feel that their lives were of interest. I had stopped being able to do that. On my left was an older Palestinian man named Abu Hassan, who sold olives and pickled vegetables from his family's suppliers in Michigan and Ohio. He had been in the market for longer than I had. He was quiet and serious, and he made good coffee on a small hot plate behind his stall, and he would offer you a cup if you were nearby and seemed like you needed one. He had offered me coffee hundreds of times over the years, and I had accepted maybe twice. I told myself I was too busy. Behind me, and 1 row over, was a young Somali-American man named Dahir, maybe 30 years old, who sold honey and spices and had been building his stall for 3 years. He was always asking the older vendors questions about suppliers, about the market rules, about how to handle a difficult customer. He had asked me several times and I had answered him in the way I did everything, efficiently, correctly, and with no warmth. He had stopped asking. These were the people I saw every day. These were my community, by geography and history, and the shared experience of building something in Dearborn from work and will. And I had been standing among them for years without actually being among them. I had become the vendor whose prices you trusted and whose company you didn't seek. I was efficient and competent, and I knew my business. If you needed produce in Dearborn, Nadia Karimi's produce was always fresh and correctly priced. But if you wanted someone to see you, you went to Betty. I was the woman the other vendors described to newcomers as, "She's fine. Just don't expect much conversation, don't try to negotiate, don't ask for a deal she hasn't offered." That was me. And I had built that version of me so slowly over so many years of mornings that I had stopped knowing it was a version and had started thinking it was simply who I was. That was me. Leave a comment with the word orange. Just that word. Because I need to tell you what I did when a man asked me for one. The Tuesday morning in October was cold, the kind of Michigan cold that feels personal. I had my coat on over my work clothes and my hands were already stiff by the time I finished setting up. The market opened at 8. By 9, it was busy. I saw him when he came in off Michigan Avenue. He was walking slowly through the market the way someone walks when they are not sure what they're looking for, but they're looking for something. He was dressed simply, a plain shirt, light jacket, nothing warm enough for October. No bag, no phone that I could see. He had long dark hair and a beard and bare feet on the cold concrete floor of the market, which I noticed because you noticed that. He stopped in front of my stall. I had oranges stacked in 3 pyramids on the front table, navels from California, bright and firm, the best ones of the season so far. I had driven to the wholesale terminal at 4 in the morning to get them. I had unloaded 40 pounds of citrus and stacked them the way Yusuf used to stack things, carefully so the best side faced out. I had hundreds of oranges. He looked at the oranges for a moment and then he looked at me. He said, "Good morning. I've been walking a long time. Could I have an orange? I'm very thirsty." I want to tell you what I actually saw in that moment, because I have thought about it more times than I can count. I saw the bare feet first. Cold, concrete floor, October, and this man was standing on it with no shoes. Then the simple clothes, not dirty but not warm enough for the weather. Then the hands, empty. And then his face. He was looking at me with an expression that was, I understand now, just patience. Complete and simple patience, the kind that does not require anything back. He was thirsty and there were oranges and he had asked the way you ask when you believe asking is reasonable, without calculation, without a strategy. And I did not see any of that. I want to be honest about what I actually saw because this is the part of the story that is hardest to say. I saw a man who wanted something from me. That is the complete extent of what I processed. Not the bare feet on cold concrete, not the distance he said he had walked, not the simple fact that I was standing inside a stall with 40 pounds of the exact thing he was asking for. Just someone is asking me for something. Another demand. Another opening hand. I was so used to things coming at me, the debt, the market, the 6 mornings a week, the nights doing accounts, that I had stopped being able to see the difference between something coming at me to take from me and something asking for help. They felt the same, the world pressing in from the outside, me holding what I had. I said, "I'm not a charity. The oranges are $1.25 each." He said, "I don't have any money with me." I said, "Then I can't help you. This is a business." I heard myself say the words, "This is a business," as if that meant something, as if those words resolved anything. I was standing in front of a man with bare feet in October saying the word business as a complete sentence. A few people nearby had turned to look. I was aware of Betty watching from her stall. He didn't argue. He didn't get embarrassed or make a scene. He looked at me for a moment with something in his expression that I could not quite name then and have tried to name many times since. It was not hurt. It was not anger. It was not the specific look of a person who has been refused and is recalculating. It was something quieter, something that looked almost like it already knew how this was going to go and was not surprised by it. He said, "God give you what you need, Mom." He said it gently, not bitterly, not as a rebuke. He said it as though he meant it specifically and sincerely, as though he had some knowledge of what I actually needed that I did not have myself. And he turned and started walking away down the aisle of the market. I turned back to my stall and I adjusted something that did not need adjusting. That is what I did. A man with bare feet on cold concrete had asked me for one piece of fruit from a stall full of fruit, and I had said no, and he had wished me well anyway. And I stood there rearranging oranges that were already arranged. That is who I was that morning. I turned back to my oranges and arranged something that didn't need arranging. Betty called after him. I heard her say, "Sir, wait a moment." She reached under her table and came up with a navel orange from a bowl she kept for samples, and 3 of the small meat pies she had made that morning, wrapped in wax paper. She had not sold them yet. She held them out to him with both hands. She said, "Here you go. It's cold out there. Take these." He stopped and looked at Betty in that particular way he had of looking at people, the full attention, the steadiness. He took what she offered with both hands, not quickly, but carefully, the way you take something when you want the person giving it to feel that it was received. He said something to her that I couldn't hear from where I was. Betty said, "Oh, it's just a little thing." He said something back. I caught the end of it. He said, "Sometimes a little thing is everything." Betty said, "You're very welcome. I hope the rest of your day is good." He smiled at her. Then he walked out of the market onto Michigan Avenue and he was gone. Betty watched him go. Then she looked over at me. I looked away. I started reorganizing the blood oranges. I want to tell you what happened to Betty that evening, because the original story mentions it and it is important. Betty told me later, weeks later after everything else had happened, that Tuesday evening her stall sold more than it had sold on any single day in her 11 years at the market. Twice what she normally sold on a Tuesday. She sold everything she had brought, and she called her daughter to bring more from home and sold that too. She could not explain it. It was a Tuesday in October, not a holiday, not an event day, nothing special on the calendar. People just kept coming. She had not told me this to make a point about herself and the orange. She told me because she thought I should know the whole picture. She is that kind of person. I thought about that for a long time after she told me. I had hundreds of oranges and I gave none. Betty had a bowl of samples and she gave from it without hesitating. And that evening, the evening of the day I turned away a man who was thirsty, Betty's stall doubled. I am not telling you this to say that generosity is a transaction, that you give and you automatically receive. I don't believe it works that way, and I don't think the story is trying to say that. I am telling you because it was part of what I learned to see when I finally started seeing clearly. That the posture of openness, the impulse to give when giving was possible, attracted something, not because it was strategic, because it was the right orientation toward the world. Betty looked over at me. I looked away first. I arranged the blood oranges. I did not look up for a long time. That night I stayed in the market after everyone else left. This is the part I have not told many people. I do this sometimes. Stay late after the other vendors have gone and the lights are dimmed and the market has gone quiet. I have done it since Yusuf died. There is something about the market at night that I have always found more honest than daytime, when it's full of commerce and noise and the performance of competence. At night it's just the space, the covered stalls, the smell of citrus and damp concrete and old wood, the sound of the refrigeration units doing their steady work. It has always been the place where I can let my guard down without anyone seeing it go down. That night I sat on my wooden stool and I took out the notebook and I opened it to the page I had stopped looking at. $87,000, 3 days. I want to tell you what those 3 days actually meant because I need you to understand what I was facing that night. It was not just the money. The money was almost secondary, as strange as that sounds. The stall was where Yusuf had died, not in a morbid way, in the sense that the last place he had been was here, moving through this space, doing work he loved. For 18 years I had come to this market and felt, in some peripheral way I never examined too closely, that as long as this stall existed, I had not completely lost him. His name was in the market's records. The other vendors knew us as a pair even though he had been gone almost 2 decades. Abu Ahmad's wife, some of them still called me, which meant Ahmad's mother and also Yusuf's wife, and I had never corrected it because I did not want to. Losing the stall was losing the last place that still held that. I sat in the market at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, and I understood, fully for the first time, that I was about to lose Yusuf twice. I do not cry. I have said this to myself for 18 years, as though it were a strength and not a symptom. I cried, not the way you cry in front of people, controlled and brief and composed again quickly. The other kind. The kind you don't allow because once it starts, you don't know where it ends. I sat on that stool in the empty market, and I cried for the stall and for Yusuf and for the debt and for the 18 years and for the woman I had become in those 18 years without fully noticing the becoming. I want to tell you what 18 years of that kind of grief looks like when you have been functional inside it, because I think some of you know this from the inside. You keep going. That is the whole strategy. You keep going and you stay useful and you do not stop. Because if you stop, you will feel the size of the empty space, and the size of the empty space is not something you are willing to feel. So you build walls around the empty space, not deliberately, not as a plan. They grow up the way weeds grow, because the conditions support them and nobody is actively preventing them. I worked, I prayed, I ate, I slept. I woke at 4 and went to the wholesale terminal and came back and set up and sold produce and went home and slept and did it again. I was correct and efficient and capable. I was solving the right problem, which was to keep the stall alive, and I was solving it every single day. But what I had not done in 18 years was grieve Yusuf. Not really. I had been at his funeral. I had done the mourning period, said the prayers, received the people who came, made the food, performed the loss the way you perform a loss in a community where the forms of grief are established and communal and there to hold you through the worst of it. And then I had closed the door on it and gotten back to work. Yusuf was gone, the stall remained, the children needed to be supported, the debt was beginning. There was no room for the actual size of what I had lost, so I had put it somewhere interior and walked away from it. For 18 years I had walked past that room and not opened the door. That night in the market, the door opened, and what was behind it was not primarily the stall or the debt. It was Yusuf, 18 years of not allowing myself to feel how large his absence was. 18 years of telling myself the efficient woman, the one who kept going, the one who prayed 5 times a day and carried the crates herself and didn't ask for help, that was strength, that was the right response. Sitting in the empty market at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, I finally understood that was not strength, that was survival. And survival and strength are not the same thing, and I had been confusing them for nearly 2 decades. When the crying finally ran out, I sat in the quiet for a while with the after feeling of it, which is a strange kind of lightness that comes after crying that sighs, like a storm that passes and leaves everything washed. And then I did something I have not done since I was a girl in Kabul. Not the ritual prayer, not the 5 times a day form I had maintained for decades without feeling anything move on the other side of it. Something different. I leaned forward with my head in my hands and I just talked, not in Arabic, in Dari, the language of my childhood, the language of my mother. I said, I don't know how to do this anymore. I don't know who I have become. I don't know where Yusuf went or where anything went. I was quiet. I said, I asked for help 5 times a day my whole adult life and I don't know if anything heard it. But I am asking now. Not for the $87,000. I am asking for something to still be possible. I don't know what. Something I can't name. Just something. The market sat around me. The refrigeration units did their steady work. The streetlights came through the high windows and made the covered stalls into gray shapes in the dimness. I stayed there for another hour and then I went home. I did not sleep, but I drove home feeling something I had not felt in a very long time, less alone than before I walked into the market that morning. That made no sense to me. I was too tired to try to make it make sense. I drove home in the dark with it, and I let it sit. The next morning, Wednesday, I came back to the market at 6, as always. I was there an hour before I was supposed to be, because sleep had been useless after midnight and the market felt safer than lying awake. I sat up in the cold. I stacked the oranges. I told myself that whatever happened on Friday, I had done what I could for 29 years, and that would have to be enough. And I did not believe a word of it, but I said it anyway. At 7:30, before the market officially opened, a young man came to my stall. He was in his mid-20s, in a work jacket, and he was looking at me the way people look when they're checking that they have the right person. He said, "Are you Nadia Karimi?" I said I was. He said, "Someone asked me to bring this to you." He held out an envelope, regular white envelope sealed. He said, "He described this market and your stall specifically. He told me you'd be here early." I said, "Who gave this to you?" He said, "A man I met on Michigan Avenue yesterday afternoon. Long hair, barefoot, which is kind of strange for October. He came up to me and asked if I was willing to do an errand for someone. He gave me something for my trouble, and he gave me the envelope." He looked at the envelope and then at me. He said, "I've been thinking about that guy since yesterday. He had a kind of a way about him, like you paid attention to what he said without meaning to." I took the envelope. I waited until the young man left and then I opened it. Inside was a piece of paper folded around a stack of bills, hundreds. I counted them with hands that were not steady. I counted them again, $87,000. No note, no name, no explanation. The exact amount I owed Frank Connolly. The amount I had told no one. The amount that lived only in my notebook and in my own head and in Frank's records. I stood at my produce stall in the Eastern Market in Dearborn at 7:30 in the morning, and I held $87,000 in cash in my hands, and the oranges in their pyramids were around me, and I could not move. Betty found me like that. She had come in early, too. She came over when she saw my face, not my expression exactly, but whatever my whole body was communicating. And she stood across the table from me and waited. I handed her the envelope. I said, "Count it." She counted. She counted again. She sat down on my stool. She said, "Nadia, where did this come from?" I told her about the young man, the man on Michigan Avenue who had sent him, the long hair and the bare feet and the way the young man described him, a kind of a way about him, like you paid attention to what he said without meaning to. Betty went very still. She said, "Nadia, does that sound like the man from yesterday?" She meant the man I had sent away. I had known since I opened the envelope. I had known, and I had sat very still with the knowing and let it finish arriving before I said it out loud. I said, "Yes." Betty looked at the pyramids of oranges on my table. She looked at me. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" I said yes. She said, "Have you forgiven him for what happened yesterday?" I sat with that question. I thought about what forgiving him would mean given what was in the envelope on my table between us. Given that he had walked away from my stall without the orange, I refused to give him and then send back, through a stranger on Michigan Avenue, more money than I could have earned in 2.5 years. I said, "Betty, I don't think I'm the one who needed to forgive." She waited. I said, "He asked me for 1 orange. I had 3 pyramids of oranges, and I told him this was a business." She didn't say anything. I said, "And then he sent back this." Betty put her hand flat on the table. She said very quietly, "Yes." I said, "What do you do with that? What do you do when someone gives you that after you gave them nothing?" She thought about it. Then she said, "You don't forgive them. You let it change you." I want to tell you about the 2 days between the envelope and paying Frank, because those 2 days were not nothing. I sat at my stall on Wednesday morning with the envelope in my bag under the table, and I worked the rest of the market day the same way I always worked it, efficiently, correctly, without warmth. But something in me was observing myself in a way I hadn't been observed in years. I watched my hand reach out for money and watched my eyes stay on the transaction and not on the person's face. I watched myself answer questions about produce with the minimum necessary information. I watched myself be exactly the vendor I had trained myself to be, and I kept thinking about the exact amount. $87,000, not $87,050, not $86,900. The precise number from my private notebook. The number nobody outside of Frank's records and my own head had access to. It was not an approximation. It was not a gift that happened to be close. It was the number, down to the dollar. That kind of specificity does something to you when you sit with it. It means something was paying attention. Something had access to information it should not have had. And the question that kept coming up in the 2 days between the envelope and Frank's office was not how, because I had no answer to how. The question was why. Why would something that had access to my private notebook also have access to information about my own behavior? Why would something that knew the exact weight of my debt also know about a man with bare feet and a refused orange? Why would those 2 things, the small moment at a stall on a Tuesday morning and the private arithmetic of 7 years of compounding debt, why would those 2 things be connected? I am not a mystical person. I never have been. My mother was practical, my father was an engineer. I was trained to solve problems, not feel them. But I sat at that stall for 2 days, thinking about a man who asked for an orange and I said no, and about $87,000 that showed up with the exact number from my notebook, and I could not make those 2 things unrelated. Wednesday evening, after the market, I went back to the Eastern Market parking lot and I sat in my car. I didn't go home. I just sat. I thought about something I hadn't thought about in a long time. I thought about what my mother used to say when she prayed. She was not a formal woman in her religion. She was educated and scientific, and she prayed the way she did everything, practically, directly, without performance. She used to say that she prayed not because she expected God to rearrange things for her, but because she needed to keep herself honest about what mattered and what didn't. She said prayer was for herself, not for God. I had been doing the opposite of that for 18 years. I had been praying as maintenance, keeping the form going, maintaining the practice, checking the box, and what I realized sitting in that car was that what I had done in the market on Tuesday night, the real thing, the leaning forward with my head in my hands, talking into the empty space, not asking for the debt but asking for something I couldn't name, That had been the first actual prayer I had said in 18 years. And then I went home. And then Friday came. I paid Frank Connolly on Friday morning. I drove to his office on Schaefer Road at 9 o'clock with the envelope in my bag, and I sat across from his desk and I put it on the table in front of him and I watched him count it. He counted it twice. He looked up at me with an expression I had not seen from Frank before. Something close to surprise mixed with something else I think was respect. The particular respect a man like Frank has for someone who shows up on time with the full amount. He processed the paperwork. He gave me the discharge. I signed what needed signing and I picked up the copies and I stood up and I left. On the sidewalk in front of Frank's office building, I stopped. It was October and the sun was low and it hit me at an angle that was almost horizontal, the way October sun does in Michigan, and I stood there in it. The weight was gone. I mean this literally, and I mean something else by it too. The literal part is the $87,000. But what I was feeling standing on that sidewalk was not the relief of a debt being paid. It was something bigger and older and more personal. It felt like putting down something I had been carrying so long I had stopped registering it as separate from me. Like when you've been wearing a heavy coat all winter and then the first warm day of spring comes and you take it off and you feel your own body as a distinct thing again. I had been carrying the debt for 7 years, but the debt was not the real weight. The real weight was everything I had become in the course of carrying it. The closed woman, the woman who could not give one orange, the person who had been compressed so slowly over so many years of doing everything alone after Yusuf that she had stopped being able to see a thirsty man as a thirsty man and only saw one more thing coming at her from the outside. That was the weight. And somehow, through a man with bare feet on a cold concrete floor and a stranger on Michigan Avenue and an envelope with exactly the right number, that weight had been paid for too. I am not going to pretend I changed overnight. I did not. What happened was slower. It looked like a bowl of fruit at the front of my table for the school kids who came through before class. It looked like helping Abu Hassan with his crates on mornings when his back was giving him trouble. It looked like stopping when Dahir had a question about a supplier and actually answering him. Not just answering him, but asking follow-up questions, finding out how his stall was doing, finding out his family's situation. It looked like very small things that were not small to the people on the receiving end. I called my son Ahmad. I had been calling him every Sunday for years. The dutiful call, 20 minutes, summary of the week, weather in Dearborn, how the market was going, how the produce prices were running. Nothing real exchanged. He would tell me about his job and his kids, and I would say, "That's wonderful." And I would mean it in a flat way that meant I was hearing the information without actually receiving it. I called him on a Wednesday night 6 weeks after the envelope, and the call lasted 2 hours, and it was the first real conversation we had had since Yusuf died. I want to tell you about one specific memory that came up in that conversation. There was a Saturday in the summer of 1998. Ahmad was 12, Layla was 9. Our youngest, Tariq, was 6. It was July and the market was at its best. Summer produce, Michigan blueberries and sweet corn and peaches from the farms down south of the city. Yusuf had gotten up before dawn to get the peaches from a farm he had a direct relationship with, an old Mennonite farmer outside of Monroe who grew the best peaches in the county and sold to Yusuf because he liked him. Yusuf came back with 3 cases of peaches at 5 in the morning, and he arranged them at the front of the stall while I was still setting up, and then he took a peach and bit into it right there, standing next to his own stall, and the juice ran down his chin and he didn't care. He said, "Nadia, taste this. Just taste this." And he handed the rest of the peach to me, and I bit into it, and it was the best peach I had eaten in years, maybe ever, warm from the truck and perfect. And Ahmad, who had come with us that morning because it was Saturday and the children usually came on Saturdays, was watching his father eat a peach with juice on his chin and laughing at him. Yusuf grabbed Ahmad and put him in a headlock and rubbed his head. And Ahmad squirmed away laughing, and then Yusuf grabbed a second peach and gave it to him. I stood at my stall on a Saturday morning in July, and I watched my husband and my son eat peaches in the morning light, and I remember thinking, this is enough. Whatever else, this is enough. That is the memory that came up when I was talking to Ahmad on the phone. I had not thought about that morning in years. I told him about it and he was quiet, and then he said, "I remember that." He said it the way you say something when you realize you have been carrying a memory without knowing it. I said, "You loved your father very much." He said, "I know. And I love you, Mama. I just haven't known how to get to you." I said, "I know. I'm sorry, I'm working on that." He was quiet on the phone for a long time after I told him. Then he said, "Mama, I have been worried about you for years. I didn't know how to say it." I said, "I know, I'm sorry I made it hard to say." He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I think I am becoming okay." That's different, but it's something. He came to visit the following month. He brought his wife and their 2 children, my grandchildren who I had been seeing twice a year at best. We all went to the Eastern Market on a Saturday morning. I showed them my stall. I introduced them to Betty, who gave the children pastries and talked to them the way Betty talks to everyone, as if they were the most interesting people she had encountered that day, which maybe they were. My granddaughter, who is 8, picked up one of the oranges from the front table and turned it over in her hands and asked me if she could have it. I gave it to her and I stood there watching her eat it, and I thought about a man who had asked for exactly that simple thing. And I prayed, not in the formal way, not facing Mecca with the ablutions, just inside, directly. A sentence in my own language. I said, "Thank you." I have called Ahmad every Wednesday evening since then. I have started visiting my daughter Layla in Chicago every few months. I have become, slowly and imperfectly, a person my children actually know. And my prayers changed, not the form or the frequency, the interior of them. I stopped performing and started actually talking. I started expecting to be heard. And some mornings in the quiet before the market opened, in the specific early gray light of Dearborn when the market is not yet running and the other vendors are just arriving, something came back, not in words, in the feeling of being in a room where someone is present. About a month after the envelope, Betty and I were closing side by side at the end of a Saturday. She asked me how I was doing. She meant it the way Betty always means everything, with the whole weight of the question. I said, "I feel like I was asleep inside myself for a very long time, and something woke me up." She nodded. She said, "That's what grace does, Nadia. It wakes you up." I said, "I always thought grace belonged to your tradition, to your faith, not to mine." She said, "It's not mine. It's his. He gives it where he wants, when someone needs it enough. The only requirement is the need." I thought about a man with bare feet on cold concrete asking for one orange, walking away without it, and sending back enough mercy to cover 7 years of compounding interest in something harder to name than money. I thought about what he had said when he left. God give you what you need, not what you want, not what you ask for, what you need. He knew what I needed better than I did. I needed $87,000, yes. But what I actually needed was to be opened back up, to be turned back toward people instead of away from them, to be the woman Yusuf had married, the one who knew how to be in community with people she lived among, the one who could see a thirsty man as a thirsty man and respond to that simple fact. He gave me that, through an orange I refused to give, through a stranger on Michigan Avenue, through a number in a notebook that nobody should have known. I don't know how to fit what I believe now into a category with a clear name. I am still working it out. What I know is that in that market on that morning, something saw me completely. The closed woman, the debt, the empty prayers, the Yusuf I was still trying to hold by keeping a stall going. And it did not leave. It came back through channels I could not have predicted and gave me what I had not known to ask for. That kind of thing has a name. I know who that name belongs to now. And knowing it has changed everything that follows. To every person watching this who has been closed for a long time by loss, by debt, by years of carrying something alone and calling it strength, I want to tell you something I did not know until I was 61 years old, standing in a parking lot outside Frank Connolly's office in October. The door you shut on yourself is not the last word. I know what it looks like from inside a closed life. It looks like competence. It looks like function. It looks like getting everything done on time, showing up every day, never complaining, never asking for anything, keeping the plate spinning and the stall open and the children fed. And the prayer said, it looks from inside exactly like strength. And from outside it also looks like strength, which is why no one intervenes, why the community around you watches and thinks she is managing and does not push on the door you have closed. You can live inside that closed place for a very long time. I lived inside it for 18 years. What I want to tell you is that being found inside it is still possible. He does not wait for you to open the door. He walks through it, asking for something small, something so small that your refusal should have been impossible, one orange from a stall full of oranges, and in the refusal, you see yourself clearly for the first time in years, and then he sends back what you actually need, not the $87,000, what you actually need. In my case, it was the debt paid, yes, and also Yusuf given back to me as a memory I could finally feel, and also my son on the phone for 2 hours, and also a bowl of small fruit at the edge of a table for children I used to not see. To anyone watching this who comes from a tradition that says he is not for you, that grace is for someone else, that you are outside the boundary of who he came for. I am a Muslim woman from Kabul who ran a produce stall in Dearborn for 29 years, and I am telling you, he came to my market in bare feet in October, asking for one orange. He was not confused about where he was. He knows the number in your notebook. He knows the weight you are carrying. He knows who you were before the years made you into who you are now. And he is interested in that person specifically. He waited while I refused him. He sent mercy back through a stranger on Michigan Avenue with the exact right amount. That is who he is. Write the word grace in the comments. Let me see where this reaches today. May Jesus walk with you today and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.